Well, hello and a very good morning, a very good afternoon, and a very good evening, tenthers. I'm hoping that all of you are doing well and doing fine along with members of your family. Now, I guess you must have seen that there has been some reduction in the syllabus. ICC says that it is nearly 25% of the syllabus which was there or which was already proposed for Standard 10. I'll just advise that you all go through the syllabus, the detailed syllabus, and also if you do not have the syllabus book, you can just turn to the first pages of every chapter of all your books, and also in the content section you will find the chapters and the detailed syllabus is already given. So strike off all those things and strike off all those parts which have been excluded from the new syllabus which has been released by the ICC as of yesterday, that is the 4th of July. I guess, yes, 4th of July. Also, an important thing, 4th of July is also celebrated as the Independence Day for America. So it was just a general information kind of thing. So, coming back to our chapter, the Revolt of 1857, we'll be ending the chapter today, and we were talking about the revolt, the outcome of the revolt. But any revolt, any incident in history does have its consequences. There are consequences to each and every event in history. Whatever happens, whatever you all do, those consequences are also there. So even in the events of history, there are consequences. Now, when we are talking of the consequences of, well, when we are talking of the consequences of the revolt of 1857, one of the most important consequence was that the company's rule came to an end. The British Crown or the British Parliament and the British government realized that leaving the most important colony of the British Empire, that is India, to be ruled under the or to be ruled by the East India Company will be a mistake, and further revolts may take place. So it was needed, or the British government understood that such a well-paying, such a rich, and such a glorious colony of the British Empire should directly come under the British Crown. So this was the first thing which happened. The Indian colony or India shifted from under the rule of the East India Company into, or it shifted from the rule of the East India Company directly to the that under the rule of the Crown or the British Crown or the British monarch and the British government. Next thing was that previously the East India Company held monopoly for trade, or for the trade from India, which or the trade which originated from India. That monopoly was held by the East India Company. After the revolt of 1857, that monopoly of the East India Company also came to an end, and the British government made it open for all the other companies or the charter companies to trade directly with India and from India. Another point was that the companies, the previously the company, the East India Company was a corporate company, and it had its own board of directors and controllers who used to look after the management, which was or look after the operations in India, the India operations. So that board of director of the company was abolished, and the rule of India directly was transferred to a cabinet minister and a cabinet minister of the British government. So you understand that the control or the power of ruling of India moved from that of the East India Company to that of the British government. And there was a new cabinet post, which was made in England. It was called the Secretary of State for India. Next, the Secretary of State for India was to be assisted by an India Council. The Secretary of State, the India Council, was to be based in London, and they were to rule, and they were to look after the interests and the other administrations and the management of India and the colony. And this became a bone of contention later on, or this became one thing which was targeted by many Indian nationalists later on. The one point which was mentioned in the or one point which was there in the for the state of Secretary of State for India will be later on, for the subsequent chapters we'll be referring to this position, the Secretary of State, as the SOS. So the SOS for India and the India Council, they were to be paid by, not by the British government, but by the taxes and the revenues which would be collected in India and from India. So this became a point which was targeted by the and attacked by the Indian nationalists, mainly by Dadabhai Naoroji. He said that this was one of the important reasons for the economic drain of India, that the people who were ruling India and who were sitting in London and who were actually ministers of the British Parliament and also belonging to the British government, they were to be paid not from the British Treasury, but from the revenue which was collected in India. So the Indian money which was being collected was not being used by the or was not being used for the welfare of the Indians, but for paying the people who will be ruling India. So this became one bone of contention. Not only this, all the other officials who were placed in India or who were posted in India, all the British officials, they were also not paid by the British government out of its own treasury, but the people or by the Britishers who were there in India, and also everyone who was working in India for the British government, they were paid by the revenue which was collected in India and from India. So this the money which was collected in India was not being used for the welfare of the Indians, but was being used to pay to those people who were ruling over India. Next, another point is that yes, previously the civil servants were appointed directly by the company directors. The civil servants and the people who were managing the affairs in India were before the war of 1857 or before the revolt of 1857, the civil servants were directly appointed by the company directors and by the members of the East India Company. After the revolt of 1857, it was decided that there will be an open examination which will be which will be selecting candidates who will be uh, who will become the civil servants and who will be looking after and managing the government in India and also the administration in India. That tradition, that exam still carries on to this day. That is the Indian Civil Services examination or the Indian Administrative Services. So the Civil Services examination was started after the revolt of 1857, and it was an open exam which used to be conducted in London, but later on, due to Indian protests, it was also conducted in India. Next, the Governor General. We all know that the British East India Company, they had, or the one who was ruling over India, that one member of the East India Company who was ruling over all of India and looking after the India management, was given the post of the Governor General. Now this post was abolished, and the new post, which came directly under the crown or the British crown or the British government, came to be known as the Viceroy. So the Governor General of India became the Viceroy of India. But there was not much of a change over here. Practically, the Governor General of India and the Viceroy of India was a similar post. Next, there was another thing which happened, or another consequence of this was the attitude of the government towards the Indian princes. It is said, or it was said later on by some British historians and also by British civil servants, that had not the princes or the Indian princes been there, the Britishers would have been wiped off by the tide of the force of the revolt of 1857. I mean, I mean that the Britishers understood that had not the Indian kings and the princes helped the Britishers against their own countrymen, or helped the Britishers to suppress the revolt of 1857, it would have been, or the Britishers would have been lost, and the Britishers would have been chased away from the Indian subcontinent. Why did the Indian prince and the kings do so? They did so because they wanted to keep their own possessions safe. They knew one thing, and let us just recall a bit. The head of, or after the revolt of 1857 started, the head of the Indian revolt was made the then, or was made, Bahadur Shah Zafar was made the head of the Indian revolt and the head of the Indian revolution. And the Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar II, who was the last Mughal emperor, he was made that head, and that figurative head. And it was said that if the Indians will be winning this revolt, then the Mughal Empire will again be established. Now, this was not a very favorable situations for all those small kings and the princes and the kingdoms which had come up after the Mughal Empire had disintegrated. So, if the Mughal Empire were to come up again, then those kings and the kingdoms which had come up after the disintegration of the Mughal Empire, those kings, kingdoms, and those princes will be lost again, and they will again be dependent on the Mughal Empire. So they did not want this kind of a situation to happen. They knew that if the Britishers were there, it will be more beneficial for them, because the Britishers, with the help of their policies and their alliances, most importantly the subsidiary alliance, will be uh, giving them, or will be allowing those kings and the princes to rule over their kingdom for some nominal benefit which they will be giving to the Britishers. So it was a win-win situation for both the kings and the kingdoms, and also for the Britishers. So those kings actually supported the Britishers in, and also helped the Britishers in suppressing the revolution. So the Indian kings and the princes, they acted as that storm breaker, or the tide breaker, which helped the Britishers quell, or which helped the Britishers suppress the revolution. So the Britishers, and after the revolt of 1857, the Britishers did not want to antagonize those kings and those princes. So they said, or the crown said, or the British government said and promised that all the treaties, all the alliances which were made by the East India Company with the kings and the princes will be followed, will be respected, and the kingdoms will be safe, and the Britishers will not be trying to acquire any new territory. And it did so happen that after the revolt of 1857, no such new territory was acquired or annexed by the Britishers. Next, another point is that reorganization of the army. Previously, when we were talking of the military causes of the revolt, we had seen that the army, there was a divide in the army. A divide as in people, or there was more number of Indians and lesser number of British officers in a certain unit. So this divide was, or this divide, or this problem in the ratio was corrected after the revolt of 1857, and more British troops were placed or posted amongst Indian troops, or alongside Indian troops. Another thing which happened, another very important thing which happened, was a few segments of the British army, or the Bengal army, before the, or during the revolt of 1857, had not participated in the revolt. So the Britishers started uh, well shortlisting those different communities, like the Sikh community, the Jat community. They had not participated actively in the revolt. So the Britishers wanted to reward those communities, and they made those communities which had not participated in the revolt and had actually helped the Britishers suppress the revolt. They made those communities, they labeled those communities as the martial groups, or the martial races. So the Gorkhas, the Jats, these became the Dogras, they became the martial races. The martial races, as in those races or those communities which are meant to fight. And the other communities, or the other people uh, who participated, or the people of other regions who participated, like the people of Awadh, the people of Bengal, so they were relegated, or they were given an inferior position than that of the martial races. So a divide and rule kind of a policy was started over here in the British Army also. Next, what happened was that a few promises were made by the Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria was the then ruling monarch of England. So a few promises were made. Promises as in, it was said that the Britishers will not be interfering in the social customs and also in the religious customs of India, and they will be allowing the Indians to live as they used to live. This was something good, and also this was something which was very, very bad. The Britishers did so because they knew that previously, because they had interfered in the Indians' social customs, and also removed a few social disturbances, and also corrected a few social wrongs, the upper castes and the other people of the Indian community, they got angered and or they got angry and they participated in the revolt of 1857. Few we were discussing when we were doing the social causes and the economic causes and the other causes that those interference of the Britishers in the social causes like removal of the untouchability or the removal of sati system and also the starting of the widow remarriage. All these things did not go down well with the Indian Pandits and also with the Indian upper castes and the upper classes, mainly the Brahmins and the Rajputs. So all these things were frowned upon and they revolted against the Britishers when the time came in 1857. So the Britishers did not want a repeat of these things. So they said that they will not be anymore, they will not interfere in the Indian social customs and religion. This was good. Well, good in the sense that there was no more interference of the Britishers, but this was bad because this there was to be no more for the next 90 years. There was to be no more social revolution or social changes which were to come in India as such. And Indian society, instead of moving forward, was even pushed backwards by this policy of the Britishers of non-interference. So they did not want the Indians or they did not want the social evils or the social customs, the evil customs of India to be wiped out because they knew that doing so will again anger the upper classes of the Indians or a few other sections of the Indians, which will not be in the best interests of of the Britishers. That is why there was to be no more interference in the social and the religious customs of India. Next, it was there that there was an official pardon which was granted to all those people who had participated in the revolt, except those people who were actually responsible for killing the British subjects or British people. So everyone who had participated in the revolt was pardoned, except those people who had actually killed or murdered some Britisher. So everyone was pardoned. Why was this done? So that the people who got pardoned will become friendly towards the Britishers and they could be won into the confidence of the Britishers and they will be and if in a future time any such other event arose, those people will not be inclined to fight against the Britishers. Next was that the Britishers proclaimed, or there was a proclamation that the material and the moral advancement of the people of India will be followed. And now this was not followed as such, and there was no material and moral advancement of the people. Material advancement, as in no such proper policy was in or was put in place by the Britishers, which was to be actually used for the welfare of the Indian people. So this was just for the sake of saying during that time. Now another very important thing which started or which happened after this revolt of 1857, or one of the most important consequence, and this thing which was started by the Britishers after the revolt of 1857, the effects of this ring till this day. The policy of divide and rule. Well, I just said one policy, or I just gave you one example of that of divide and rule in the British Army, when a few races or a few classes, a few communities were made the martial races and given a higher status or a superior status, and the other communities which actually had participated in the revolt was given an inferior status and were given a inferior position as compared to the martial races. This was one event of, or this was one example of divide and rule. But the most important divide and rule policy which was put in place by the Britishers was the divide and rule between the two main religions of India, Hinduism and Islam. The Hindu community and the Islamic community had coexisted peacefully for so many hundreds of years. You can say after the first entry of the Islamic community in India happened nearly around 800 or 900 AD. So 800 or 900 years after the birth of Christ, it was around those years that Islam gradually started coming towards, or gradually started entering India through the coastal routes and through the coastal towns of the western coast of India. And later on, after the invasion of the Turkish rulers there were the Turkish kings, there were the Afghans, there was the Mughal Empire. So there were so many empires also There were so many Islamic kingdoms which were in India. So all of these things brought together the Islamic community and the Hindu community in very close contact in India. And the Islamic community and the Hindu community, except for a few despotic kings and for a few despotic emperors, the Hindu community and the Islamic community coexisted very peacefully, and there was an infusion of the culture, and there was also an very vibrant mix of culture traditions of the Islamic and the Hindu community. And this was something which reached its peak during the revolt of 1857. During the revolt of 1857, the Islamic community, Hindu community, there was no divide as such, and the Hindus and the Muslims, they fought together against a common enemy, the Britishers. The Britishers understood that, or the Britishers realized that this would pose a problem later on. If the two main communities of India get united, then it will be a problem for the Britishers to rule over India. The Britishers had understood while staying in India for the previous 100, 150 years that India was a country, or India was a land which was steeped in religions and such cultural inclinations, or there was religious and cultural inclinations in India, and people were much religious over here than in any other places of the world. So they knew that religion was, or the Britishers understood that in India religion was an emotion, and the Britishers understood, and the Britishers knew how to use this religion, and they put in a divide over here, the Hindu and the Muslim divide. The Britishers, after the revolt of 1857, started favoring the Hindus, and the Muslims were looked down upon, and the Britishers turned against the Muslim community, and they started giving more privileges to the Hindu community. More government jobs were made available to the Hindu communities. More, or the Hindu community was given more access to education. So this pushed the Muslim community to a very, or this pushed the Muslim community to a very poorer status in the Indian society. But later on, what happened was that after the Hindu community got started getting educated, they started turning against their British masters, and there was the foundation of the Indian National Congress also. So now the Britishers understood that the Hindu community was to be suppressed and the Muslim community was to be favored. So after a short period of the Britishers being against the Islamic community and favoring the Hindu community, after this short while, they turned, or they started favoring the Islamic community, and they started turning against the Hindu community. So now the Hindu community was denied the or was denied government jobs and also proper access to education, while the Muslim community was given more favor, or was favored in the government jobs, and also the Islamic community was given better access to education. So the second time what happened was that the Hindu community got relegated, or got that or started getting that poorer status in the Indian society, while the Muslim community was raised to a higher pedestal. So this shift and this to and fro motion of the Britishers in favoring once the Islamic community, the other time the Hindu community, they did so, and while doing so, they actually planted the seeds of discord between the two communities, or the two main communities of India, the Islamic community and the Hindu community. The Britishers started painting the Islamic community as the enemy of the Hindu community, and the Hindu community as the enemy of the Islamic community. But it was always the Britishers and their own vested interests which was the actual enemy of both the communities in India. So this was not realized by the leaders of both the Islamic community and the Hindu community, and even though they realized, maybe due to their own interests and due to their own power and the thirst for power by both the leaders of, there was a thirst for power for both the leaders of the Hindu community and the Islamic community, that they never came together against their common enemy, the Britishers. And this, the climax of this was reached after, or when India, during, or when it got independence, it was divided into two countries, Pakistan and India. So this, or these seeds of discord and these seeds of hatred which was planted by the Britishers way back in 1857, culminated in the division of India into two countries, Pakistan and India, in the or when India got independent in 1947. So, well, these were some of the most important consequences of the war of 1857. I hope most of the points were clear to you all. Please go through not only this video, there are so many other videos, so many books, and please stay up to date with all the syllabus and the changes in the syllabus which has been proposed by the ICC. And please stay safe, be safe. If you do have any problems, please mention it in the comment section so that I can get back to you. Thank you.